Tonight, we are going to walk a very gentle path together. It is a path that many have walked before us, through ancient forests of wisdom, along quiet rivers of understanding. And the destination is not some faraway place. It is actually the place you have never truly left. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you're listening from. We will sit with some beautiful old stories. We will listen to the wisdom of those who walked this earth long before us. We will explore a simple but profound truth, one that the great spiritual traditions have whispered for thousands of years, that beneath every worry, beneath every doubt, beneath every harsh word you have ever spoken to yourself, there is something whole, something untouched, something that has been quietly shining like the sun behind the clouds for your entire life. So let your body settle. Let your breathing be easy. Let the weight of the day slide gently off your shoulders. You do not need to hold anything right now. You do not need to be anywhere else. Take a slow, deep breath, and let's begin our journey together. There is a saying in the Zen tradition, "You are already what you are looking for." It is one of the simplest teachings in all of Buddhism, and also one of the hardest to believe. Because if you are anything like most of us, you have spent a good part of your life quietly feeling that something about you is not quite right. Not broken exactly, but not whole either. Not enough. The Buddha himself spoke of this. He said that human beings carry a kind of restlessness, a subtle ache that follows us through our days. We feel it when the house is still and there is nothing left to distract us. We feel it late at night, lying in the dark, when the mind begins to whisper its familiar worries. We feel it as a tightness in the chest, a low hum of doubt that we are somehow falling behind, falling short, or failing at this whole beautiful, confusing business of being alive. If you have ever felt that, even for a moment, you are not alone. You are in the company of nearly every human being who has ever lived. And you are also in the company of every great teacher who has ever sat beneath a tree and asked, "What is this feeling, and where does it come from?" What the Buddha discovered, and what the Zen masters have been gently reminding us of for centuries, is that this ache is not evidence that something is wrong with us. It is a sign that we have forgotten something important, something that was true about us before we learned to worry, before we learned to compare, before anyone ever told us we needed to be different than we are. What we have forgotten is our own goodness. Now, that word, goodness, can feel complicated. It can feel like something we have to earn, or something that belongs to people who are better than us, kinder than us, more patient. But tonight, let us set all of that aside. Let us look at this word with fresh eyes and see what it actually means. The word good is very ancient. It reaches all the way back to a root that also gave us the words gather and together. Goodness, in its oldest and most original sense, does not mean being perfect. It does not mean never making mistakes. It means belonging. It means being part of the whole. When you feel connected to the people around you, to the earth beneath you, to the quiet rhythm of your own breathing, that feeling of being woven into life itself, that is goodness. You have felt it before. In a moment of laughter with someone you love, in the stillness of an early morning, in the unexpected kindness of a stranger, that warmth, that openness, that sense of being exactly where you belong, that is not something you created. It is something you remembered. The Buddha once said, "You yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection." This is not a sentimental idea. It is a deep recognition that the love we seek outside of ourselves has been inside us all along, patient as a candle in a window, waiting for us to come home. But the question is, if this goodness is our true nature, why does it so often feel hidden? Why do so many of us walk through our days carrying a secret weight of self-doubt? Let us explore a story. There was once an old monk who lived in a small mountain monastery, the kind of place where moss grew soft and green between the stones, and the only sounds were birdsong and the distant murmur of a stream. He had spent many years in silence and practice, and students would come from distant villages to sit with him and learn. He was not famous. He did not write books or give grand speeches. He simply lived quietly, and something about his presence made people feel at ease. One afternoon in late autumn, a young traveler arrived at the monastery gates. She was tired from a long journey, and her face carried the kind of weariness that comes not from walking, but from thinking too much. Her shoes were dusty. Her pack was heavy, but it was the weight behind her eyes that told the real story. The old monk welcomed her without questions and offered her tea. He prepared it slowly, warming the cups first with hot water, measuring the leaves with care. They sat together in a small room overlooking the valley, where the last golden leaves of the season clung to the branches of the maples. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The sound of wind moving through pine trees filled the silence, and the steam from their cups rose and disappeared like small prayers. Finally, the young woman said, "I have come because I do not know how to stop feeling that something is wrong with me. I have tried everything. I have read books. I have followed teachers. I have changed my habits and my home and even my name. But no matter what I do, when I am quiet, the feeling returns. Like a shadow I cannot outrun." The old monk nodded slowly. He did not seem surprised. He poured more tea into her cup and said, "Tell me, have you ever flown above the clouds?" She looked at him, puzzled. "Once," she said. "When I was young, I took a journey by air across the mountains." "And what did you see?" he asked, "when you rose above the clouds?" She thought for a moment. "Sunlight," she said. "Just sunlight. Everywhere. The sky was perfectly clear and warm and bright. And below me, the clouds looked so small, like a thin blanket laid over the earth." The old monk smiled gently. "You see," he said, "the sun was always there. Even when you were standing on the ground, looking up at grey skies and rain, the sun had not moved. It had not dimmed. It had not abandoned you. It was simply hidden by the clouds." He set down his cup and looked at her with great kindness. "What you call something wrong with me is the clouds. The worry is clouds. The self-doubt is clouds. The feeling that you must be different to be worthy, that too is clouds. They are real, yes. You can feel them. They cast shadows. Sometimes they bring storms. But they are not the sky, and they are not the sun." The young woman sat with this for a while. The wind continued to move through the pines. Finally she said, "But the clouds keep coming back." "Yes," said the monk. "They do. That is what clouds do. And that is what makes the sun so remarkable. It never stops shining, no matter how many clouds pass in front of it. Your goodness is like that sun. It does not go away when you feel afraid or ashamed or lost. It is always shining. You have simply forgotten to look up. This is the teaching at the heart of what we are exploring tonight. There is nothing wrong with you. There never was. What happened is that life, as it does for all of us, laid clouds across your sky. Perhaps they came early, in the form of words spoken by someone who did not understand the weight of what they were saying. Perhaps they came later, through experiences that made you feel small, or mistakes that convinced you that you were broken. But the clouds are not who you are. They are weather, and weather always passes. In the Zen tradition, there is a beautiful phrase, "From the beginning, all beings are Buddha." This does not mean we are perfect. It means that the deepest part of us, the awareness that is reading these words right now, the tenderness that aches when we see someone suffering, the quiet joy that rises when we watch the light change at the end of the day, this is our original nature. It was here before the clouds arrived, and it will be here long after they have drifted away. But how did the clouds form in the first place? This is worth understanding, not to blame anyone, but simply to see clearly. And seeing clearly is the beginning of freedom. When we are very young, we come into this world with two deep needs. The first is to be seen, truly seen, understood for who we actually are, not for who others hope we will become, not for the version of us that causes the least trouble, but for the full, true, sometimes messy reality of who we are. The second need is to be loved, not for what we do, but for what we are. Not because we performed well, or stayed quiet, or made someone proud, but simply because we exist. These two needs are like the roots of a great tree. When they are nourished, when a child feels both understood and cherished, something remarkable happens. The child grows tall and open and unafraid. They move through the world with a natural ease, a quiet confidence that does not need to prove itself, because it already knows it belongs. But for most of us, these needs were met imperfectly. Not because our parents or caregivers were bad people. Almost always, they were doing the very best they could with what they had been given. But they, too, were carrying their own clouds. They, too, had learned to doubt themselves. They, too, had grown up in a world that told them they needed to be more, do more, try harder. And so, without meaning to, they passed along small messages. Sometimes through words spoken in frustration, sometimes through silence, when a child needed to hear, "You are wonderful, just as you are." Sometimes just through the busy distraction of lives that were already overwhelmed. A child does not know how to say, "That is your cloud, not mine." A child takes it in. A child believes it. And from those small messages, gathered over months and years like snowflakes building into drifts, we began to build a story. A quiet, persistent story that said, "I am not quite enough. Something about me needs to be fixed. If I could just be a little smarter, a little calmer, a little thinner, a little more like that person over there, then I would be okay. Then I would finally deserve to rest." This story is so common that it almost feels like the truth. But it is not the truth. It is a cloud. There is another old story, passed down through generations of teachers. A young apprentice once went to an elder and said, "I have been practicing for many years, but I still feel unworthy. I sit in meditation, and all I can see are my failures and my flaws. When will I finally become good enough? The elder did not answer right away. Instead, she reached into a pouch at her side and pulled out a small, rough stone. It was covered in dust and dirt, ordinary in every way, the kind of thing you might step over on a path without a second glance. "What do you see?" she asked, holding it out on her open palm. "A stone," said the apprentice, a little confused. "Just a plain, dirty stone." The elder nodded. Then, with great patience, she began to wipe the stone with a soft cloth. She did not rush. She moved the cloth over the surface slowly, tenderly, the way you might wash the face of a sleeping child. Layer by layer, the dust fell away, and underneath, the stone began to change. It caught the light. It gleamed. It was not a plain stone at all. It was a jewel, deep and luminous, with facets that scattered small rainbows across the elder's hand. The apprentice stared. "It was there the whole time," she whispered. "Yes," said the elder. "This jewel was never missing. It did not need to be created or earned or imported from some far-off land. It only needed to be uncovered. The dust did not change what it was. And your doubts and your fears, my dear, do not change what you are." The apprentice held the jewel for a long time, turning it in her fingers. "But I have so much dust," she said quietly. The elder laughed, a warm, gentle sound, like water over smooth stones. "We all do," she said. "That is why we have each other. That is why we practice. Not to become something new, but to remember what was always here. As the great teacher Thich Nhat Hanh once said, because you are alive, everything is possible. Everything. Not because you need to become something new, but because what you already are is more than enough." Now, let us pause here for a moment and let this land gently. Think about the way you spoke to yourself today. Was there a moment when you criticized yourself, even quietly? Perhaps you forgot something and called yourself foolish. Perhaps you looked at someone else's life and felt you were falling behind. Perhaps you simply felt a nameless heaviness and assumed it meant something was wrong. What if, in that moment, you could hear the old monk's voice, saying gently, "That is the clouds. That is only the clouds. The sun has not moved. This is not about pretending that pain does not exist. It is not about forcing a smile when your heart is heavy. The clouds are real. They cast real shadows. But the practice, the gentle practice we are walking through tonight, is simply learning to remember that you are the sky, not the weather. You are the sun, not the clouds. In the Buddhist tradition, this remembering has a name. It is called coming home. And coming home does not require a journey to some distant place. It does not require years of study or a perfect life or the approval of anyone else. It requires only this, a willingness to pause, to look beneath the surface of your worry, and to recognize what has been there all along. The Dhammapada, one of the most ancient collections of the Buddha's words, opens with this teaching. We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. If we walk through our days thinking we are broken, we build a world that confirms it. Every mirror reflects the flaw. Every silence becomes evidence. Every small stumble becomes proof. But if we can begin, even just a little, to think, perhaps there is something good here, something whole, something that does not need fixing, then a different world begins to open. It is the same world, the same life, the same face in the mirror, but it is seen through different eyes. And here is the beautiful thing. You do not have to believe it fully right now. You do not have to feel it in every cell of your body. You do not need to have some dramatic moment of transformation where trumpets sound and everything changes. You only need to be open to the possibility. Just a small crack. A tiny willingness to consider that maybe, just maybe, the story you have been telling yourself is not the whole truth. That is enough. That small crack of openness is how the light gets in. And once even a little light enters, it has a way of finding every corner of the room. Let us return to our story of the young woman at the monastery. After sitting with the old monk for several days, she asked him one more question before she left. "How do I remember?" She said, "How do I remember the sun when the clouds are thick and I cannot see anything but grey?" The monk thought for a moment, watching a bird settle on a branch outside the window. Then he said, "You do not have to push the clouds away. That is too much effort, and it does not work. The harder you push, the more solid they seem. Instead, simply notice them. Say to yourself, 'Ah, clouds.' That is all. Do not argue with them. Do not try to understand why they came. Just notice." He paused, and the room was very still. When you notice the clouds without fighting them, something very quiet begins to happen. You begin to realize that the one who is noticing is not the clouds. The one who sees the worry is not worried. The one who feels the doubt is not doubtful. That awareness, that calm, clear awareness that can gently observe all of this weather without being swept away by it, that is the sun. And the moment you notice it, you are already home. You did not have to go anywhere. You simply had to stop and look and see what was already shining. She bowed to him, and he bowed to her. As she walked down the mountain path, the sky above the valley was overcast, as it often was in that season. The air was cool and damp, and the pine trees swayed gently in the breeze. But for the first time in as long as she could remember, the grey sky did not feel heavy. It was simply the sky doing what the sky does. And somewhere above it, she knew the sun was shining, warm and patient and unchanged. There is a Zen saying, "Sitting quietly, doing nothing, spring comes, and the grass grows by itself." We do not have to force our goodness to appear. We do not have to earn it, or build it, or prove it. We simply have to stop covering it up and let it shine, the way it always has, the way it always will. The grass does not strain to grow. The flower does not struggle to bloom. And your goodness does not need your permission to exist. It only needs your willingness to stop arguing with it. So as you lie here tonight, let yourself be held by this one simple truth. Nothing is wrong with you. Nothing has ever been fundamentally wrong with you. There have been clouds, yes. Some of them thick and dark and frightening. But beneath them all, beneath every harsh word you have spoken to yourself, beneath every moment of doubt, there is a goodness that has never once flickered. It is shining now as you listen. It is shining now as you breathe. Let us pause here. Notice how you are feeling in this moment. Let your breath move gently through you. And when you are ready, we will continue together. Sometimes the heaviest things we carry are not the things that happen to us. They are the things we believe about ourselves because of what happened. A moment of unkindness we cannot take back. A time when someone we loved needed us and we did not see it. A choice we made in confusion that left a mark we cannot seem to erase. These are the quiet burdens that settle deep in the body, below the place where words can easily reach. And when we carry something like that, when the weight of our own regret feels like a stone on the chest, it can seem impossible to trust ourselves. Goodness feels like a word meant for other people, not for us. Not after what we did, not after what we failed to do. There is a Buddhist teaching that says, holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal. You are the one who gets burned. But what is less often spoken about is that holding on to self-blame works the same way. We grip it tightly, thinking that if we punish ourselves enough, we will somehow make things right. But all that happens is that our hands keep burning and our hearts stay closed. Tonight, let us set down that coal, even for a little while. Let us sit with a story about how one person found her way back to trusting herself, not by pretending the hurt had never happened, but by discovering that she was held by something larger than her pain. There was a woman who had spent most of her life trying to care for the people she loved. She was a mother, and like so many mothers, she had given everything she could think to give. She had built her home with patience and warmth, one small act of devotion at a time. She was not perfect, of course. No one is. But she had tried, in her own quiet way, to be a safe harbor for her family. Then, late in her life, she learned something that shook her to the ground. She discovered that during a time when her children were young, one of them had been quietly suffering. Not in a way she could see, not in a way anyone had spoken about, but suffering all the same, carrying a private pain that had gone unnoticed for years. When this truth finally came to light, the woman did not turn her grief outward. She turned it inward. How could I not have known? How could I have been so blind? What kind of mother does not see when her own child is hurting? These questions circled through her mind like a wind that would not stop, and each time they passed, they wore her down a little more. She could not sleep. She could not rest. She moved through her days as if something essential had been taken from her, and in a way, it had. What had been taken was her belief that she was a good person. In its place, there was only a terrible emptiness and the conviction that she did not deserve kindness. Not from others, and certainly not from herself. After many weeks of this, she went to see an old teacher who had been a guide to her years before. He was a gentle man, quiet and unhurried, with large, steady hands and a way of listening that made people feel they were the only person in the world. He lived simply, in a small room lined with books and soft light, and when you sat with him, the rest of the world seemed to grow very still. She sat across from him and told him everything. The words came out in a flood, tangled and raw. She told him what she had learned and what she believed it meant about her. She told him she did not know how to carry it. She told him she was not sure she could. I should have known, she said, her voice breaking. I was right there. I was in the same house. How could I not have felt it? The old teacher listened without interrupting. He did not try to fix anything. He did not offer reassurance or easy answers. He did not say, "It was not your fault." He did not say, "You need to forgive yourself." He simply let her speak until the words ran out and the room was quiet again, and the only sound was the rain falling softly against the window. Then he did something she did not expect. He reached across the space between them and gently took her hand. He turned it so her palm was facing up, open like a small bowl. And with one finger, slowly and deliberately, he drew a circle in the center of her palm. "Right now," he said softly, "this is where you are living." He touched the circle. This small space. It is a place of anguish. It is a place of fear and regret, and the belief that you are not worthy of love. I understand, and I am not going to ask you to leave this place. Not yet. You need to feel what you are feeling. You need to see it clearly. That is important. That is honest. She looked down at the invisible circle in her hand, and her eyes filled with tears, because yes, that was exactly where she was. That small, tight, unbearable space. He had named it perfectly. Then the old teacher placed his other hand over hers. His palm covered her palm completely, warm and steady, the way the earth holds a seed through winter, the way a river holds a stone. But also remember this, he said. You are not only the circle, you are also this. He pressed gently. This warmth around the circle, this care that is larger than the pain. This is also real. This is also here. And if you can feel what you are feeling while also remembering this, you will find, in time, a freedom you did not know was possible. She looked at him. How can both be true? She asked. How can I be in so much pain and also be held? He smiled, and it was the kindest smile she had ever seen. That, he said, is the mystery. And it is not something you need to understand with your mind. It is something you feel with your heart, and your heart already knows. She did not believe him. Not that day. The pain was too loud, too close, too convincing. When she left his room and walked out into the evening air, the world looked exactly as it had before. Grey and heavy and unforgiving. She thought, perhaps, that his words had been kind but empty. A nice gesture from a good man, nothing more. But something about the warmth of his hand stayed with her. It lived in her body in a way his words could not. It was such a simple thing. A hand over a hand. No argument. No philosophy. Just warmth meeting pain. And it spoke in a language that went deeper than words, deeper than reason, deeper than the story she had been telling herself for weeks. In the days and weeks that followed, whenever the anguish would rise, and it rose often, sometimes in the middle of the night, sometimes while washing dishes, sometimes with no warning at all, she would remember that moment. She would close her eyes and imagine the circle in her palm, the small space of her pain. She would let herself feel it. She would not run from it. And then, gently, she would imagine the warmth of the larger hand covering it, not erasing it, not pretending it was not there, but holding it, surrounding it with something steady and kind and patient. Some days, this was the hardest thing she had ever done. Some days, the pain seemed to laugh at her efforts, but she kept returning to it. She kept reaching for the memory of that hand, and slowly, so slowly she almost did not notice, the grip of her suffering began to loosen. Not because the pain went away, but because she was no longer alone with it. There is a line from an ancient Buddhist text that says, as a mother would protect her only child with her life, even so, let one cultivate a boundless love towards all beings. We hear that teaching and we think it is about loving others. And it is. But there is a quieter truth inside it. Before we can offer that boundless love to the world, we must learn to offer it to ourselves, especially to the parts of ourselves that feel most undeserving, especially there. Slowly, over many weeks and months, something began to shift in this woman. It did not happen all at once. It was not a flash of light or a sudden realization. It was more like the way dawn comes in winter, so gradually that you cannot point to the exact moment the darkness ended. One moment the sky is black, then it is deep blue, then pale gray. Then, without any announcement at all, there is light. And you realize it has been arriving for a long time. You simply were not watching closely enough to see it. What shifted was this. She began to notice that the warmth she had been imagining, the large, kind hand of her teacher holding her pain, was starting to feel familiar. Not like something coming from outside, but like something waking up inside her own chest. Like a fire that had been burning low in a room she had forgotten she had, and now she could feel its heat through the wall. She realized, with a kind of wonder, that the mercy she had needed so desperately had been part of her own heart all along. It had always been there, the way water is always there beneath the ground, even in the driest season. She had simply been in too much pain to feel it. She had needed someone else to remind her, to place their hand over hers and say, without words, this warmth is real. It exists. It has not abandoned you. And once she could feel it from the outside, she could begin, slowly, carefully, like a person learning to walk again, to recognize it on the inside. This did not mean the regret disappeared. It did not mean she never felt the sting of what had happened. But the regret no longer defined her. It was the circle in her palm, yes. But she was no longer only the circle. She was also the warmth. This story carries a teaching that runs deep through the Buddhist tradition. We are not meant to do this alone. The Buddha himself did not awaken in isolation. He sat beneath the Bodhi tree, yes, alone in the dark of night. But he was held by the earth. The old stories say that when doubts came to him, whispering that he was not worthy of awakening, that he should give up, that he was foolish to even try, he did not argue with them. He did not fight them. He simply reached down and touched the ground, and the earth itself rose up to bear witness. I know who you are, the earth said. You belong here. You are worthy of this. Think about that for a moment. Even the Buddha needed to be reminded. Even the one who would go on to teach the world about the nature of freedom needed, in his darkest hour, to feel the steadiness of something beneath him, holding him up. If he needed that, then surely it is all right for us to need it too. Sometimes we need the earth to remind us. Sometimes we need a friend, sitting quietly beside us, saying nothing but meaning everything. Sometimes we need a teacher or a kind word from someone we barely know, a stranger who holds a door or offers a smile and, without realizing it, says to our tired heart, you are seen. You matter. Sometimes we need the memory of a hand placed over ours, the warmth of someone communicating, not with words but with presence. You are more than your worst moment. You are more than the thing you cannot forgive yourself for. There is a beautiful tradition in Buddhism of what might be called boundless compassion. It is sometimes pictured as a gentle figure with 1,000 arms, each one reaching out to hold someone in pain. But the real teaching is not about a figure with 1,000 arms. It is about the recognition that compassion is the very fabric of life. It is not something we have to manufacture or earn. It is what flows naturally when the heart is no longer clenched in fear. And this is the remarkable thing. The more we allow ourselves to be held, the more we discover that we are the ones doing the holding. The compassion we receive and the compassion we give turn out to be the same compassion. Like water poured from one cup into another, it is all the same water. It is all the same love. Let us sit with this for a moment. Is there something you have been carrying? Not the great dramatic burdens necessarily. Perhaps just a quiet regret. A time you said something you wish you could take back. A moment when you were not the person you wanted to be. A small failure of patience or kindness that still echoes, sometimes, in the quiet hours before sleep. Most of us have something like that. A drawer in the heart that we keep closed. A memory that makes us wince when it surfaces. And most of us have learned to deal with it in one of two ways. Either we press it down and try to forget it, or we rehearse it over and over, going around the same painful loop, hoping that if we punish ourselves enough, we will somehow earn the right to let it go. But punishment does not open the heart. It closes it tighter. Blame does not lead to freedom. It leads to more blame. And this is not a flaw in us. It is simply how the mind works when it is afraid. What if, instead, you could imagine, just for this moment, that someone you deeply trust is sitting beside you, not saying anything, not trying to fix anything, not even asking you to explain, just present, warm, steady, and in that presence, there is a wordless message, as clear as a hand placed gently over yours. I see what you are carrying, and it does not change how I feel about you. You are still good. You are still dear. You are still whole. Can you let that in, even a little? Even just the idea of it? You do not have to feel it completely. Just let the possibility sit with you, the way you might let a cup of warm tea sit between your hands on a cold evening. Just hold it. Feel its warmth. The Zen teacher Shunryu Suzuki once said, "You are perfect exactly as you are, and you could use a little improvement." There is such tenderness in that, such humor and honesty. Yes, we are imperfect. Yes, we have caused harm, sometimes to the people we love most. And yes, we are still, at our core, something good. Both of these are true at the same time. And holding both of them, without needing to choose, without needing one to cancel out the other, is what it means to live with an open heart. The woman in our story eventually found her way back to her daughter. It took time. It took more courage than she thought she had. But one day, she sat down beside her and spoke simply and honestly. She did not offer excuses. She did not try to explain or defend. She simply said, "I am sorry. I did not see what was happening. I wish more than anything that I had. And I am here now. I am here now, and I am not going anywhere." Her daughter was quiet for a long time. And then she looked at her mother, really looked at her, and saw something she had not expected. She saw someone who had suffered too. Someone who had walked through her own long night and come out the other side, not unscathed, but softer, more open, more real. "I was so angry with you," her daughter said quietly. "For such a long time." "I know," her mother said. "You had every right to be. But I can see now," her daughter continued, that you were hurting too. And in that recognition, something softened between them. Not everything was healed in that moment. Healing is patient work. It has its own rhythm, its own seasons, and it cannot be rushed. But a door opened that had been closed for a very long time. And through that door, light came in. This is what happens when we stop running from our own pain and instead let it be held. We become softer, more honest, more available to the people who need us. Not because we are perfect, but because we have stopped pretending to be. And that honesty, that willingness to show up and say, I am here with all of my imperfection, and I am here with love, is worth more than any polished version of ourselves we could ever manufacture. An old Buddhist proverb says, the wound is the place where the light enters you. Not around the wound, not instead of the wound. Through it, our broken places, when they are met with tenderness, become the very openings through which love flows most freely. So tonight, as you lie here, breathing gently, let us carry this one small image with us into the next part of our journey. A circle in the center of a palm, small, tender, real, and a larger hand, warm and steady, placed gently over it, not pushing the pain away, not pretending it is not there, just holding it, the way the sky holds the clouds, the way the earth holds the rain, the way life, in its quiet mercy, has always held you. Let us pause here. Feel the weight of your body, supported. Notice your breathing, easy and natural. And when you are ready, we will continue together. There is a quiet kind of courage that the world does not often talk about. It is not the courage of grand gestures or bold declarations. It is the courage it takes to say to another person, I am sorry. I caused you harm, and I have carried it with me every day since. Forgiveness is one of the oldest teachings in the Buddhist tradition, and also one of the most misunderstood. We sometimes think of forgiveness as something we do for the other person, as if we are letting them off the hook. But the Buddha taught something different. He taught that forgiveness is what happens when we finally set down the weight we have been carrying. Not because the weight does not matter, but because our arms are tired and our hearts were never meant to hold that much for that long. Tonight, let us sit with a story about a man who carried such a weight for more than 20 years, and about the journey he eventually made, not to forget what had happened, but to let it become something new. A long time ago, in a period of great conflict between two lands, a young man was sent far from his home to serve as a soldier. He was barely more than a boy, really. He had grown up in a small town where he knew his neighbors by name, and where the worst trouble he had ever seen was a summer storm that knocked down the fence around his mother's garden. But the place they sent him was nothing like home. It was dense and green and unfamiliar, and the air was heavy with heat and the sound of insects he could not name. He was frightened most of the time, though he would not have said so. He did what he was told. He followed orders. He tried to stay alive. One day, on a narrow path through the forest, he came face to face with a man from the other side. They were alone. The forest was still. The other man was older, perhaps by 10 or 15 years, and he was carrying a small pack. For a long moment, the two of them simply looked at each other. The older man did not raise his weapon. He just stood there, watching the young soldier with an expression that was hard to read. It might have been sadness. It might have been recognition. It might have been something like mercy. The young soldier did not have that same stillness. His training took over, the way a current takes over, a leaf on a river, and in an instant, without thinking, without choosing, he acted. And the older man fell. Afterward, the young soldier knelt beside the man and found, in his pack, a small photograph. It showed the man standing with a young girl, his daughter. She was perhaps 5 or 6 years old, smiling up at the camera with a gap between her front teeth. On the back of the photograph, someone had written a few words in a language the soldier could not read. He put the photograph in his wallet. He did not know why. Perhaps it was guilt. Perhaps it was a way of saying, "I will not forget you." Perhaps it was the only thing he could do that felt human in a moment when everything human had been stripped away. And he carried that photograph with him for the next 22 years. 22 years is a long time. Long enough to come home from that far-off land. Long enough to build a life, to marry, to have 2 daughters of his own. Long enough to learn how to laugh again, and how to sit at a dinner table, and how to sleep through most nights without waking in a cold sweat. Long enough for the world to change around him, for seasons to turn, for hair to go grey, for the young man he had been to become a stranger in the mirror. But it was not long enough to forget. Every time he opened his wallet, there was the photograph. The man. The girl. The gap-toothed smile. And every time he saw it, he felt the same thing, a burning in his chest that no amount of time could cool. He would be standing in line at a shop, reaching for money, and there it was. He would be at his daughter's school, looking for an address card, and the face would look up at him. A whole life going on around him, ordinary and bright, and underneath it, always, this silent companion of grief. Sometimes he would stare at the photograph late at night, after the house was quiet and his family was asleep. He would hold it under the lamplight and look at the man's face, trying to understand something he could never quite reach. Who were you? What was your life like before that day? Did you know, when you looked at me, what was about to happen? And if you did, why did you not raise your weapon? Why did you just stand there? He had never spoken about it to anyone. Not his wife. Not his closest friends. It lived in him the way a stone lives at the bottom of a river, always there, always heavy, even when the water above it looks calm and clear. And over the years, the weight of it had become so familiar that he almost forgot it was there. Almost. But not quite. The body remembers what the mind tries to set aside. The Buddha once said, "In the end, only 3 things matter. How much you loved, how gently you lived, and how gracefully you let go of things not meant for you." But this man did not know how to let go. He did not know how to set the stone down, because setting it down felt like it would mean the other man's life did not matter. And it mattered. It mattered terribly. It mattered more than he could say. Then one day, something shifted. He was in his 50s by now, and his daughters were grown, and he had begun to feel, with the kind of clarity that sometimes comes in the second half of life, that he could not carry this forever. Not because he wanted to forget, but because the weight was slowly crushing something inside him that still wanted to live. He made a decision that surprised everyone who knew him, including himself. He decided to travel back to that distant land, find the family of the man in the photograph, and return it to them. When he told his wife, she looked at him for a long time without speaking. Then she took his hand and said, "Go. It is time." It was not a simple journey. It took months of searching, of asking questions through interpreters, of following threads that often led nowhere. He traveled through villages where no one recognized the photograph, down roads that ended at rivers, through towns where people shook their heads kindly and pointed him further on. Many times he thought about turning back. Many times the old voice in his head told him this was foolish, that he would never find them, that some things cannot be undone no matter how far you travel. But he did not give up. Something was pulling him forward, the way the tide pulls toward the shore. Not because the shore asks for it, but because that is simply where the water needs to go. And he understood, somewhere beneath his doubt, that this journey was not really about finding a family in a distant country. It was about finding his way back to his own heart. And finally, in a small village surrounded by green hills and rice fields, where the air smelled of wood smoke and jasmine, he found her. The girl in the photograph. She was a grown woman now, with lines around her eyes and a family of her own. And her brother was there too, a quiet man with their father's face. Through an interpreter, the man introduced himself. His hands were shaking. His voice was unsteady. He held out the photograph, this small, worn rectangle that he had carried for more than 2 decades, and he said, "This belonged to your father. I took it from him a long time ago, on a day that I have thought about every day since. And I have come to return it to you, and to ask for your forgiveness." The room was very quiet. The interpreter spoke. The woman looked at the photograph, and then she looked at the man standing before her, this stranger who had traveled across the world, carrying her father's image next to his heart. And then she began to cry. Not the crying of anger, not the crying of accusation, but the kind of crying that comes when something that has been frozen for a very long time finally begins to thaw. She stepped forward and put her arms around him, and the two of them stood there, holding each other, this woman and this stranger, connected by a single photograph and 22 years of silent grief. The interpreter wiped his own eyes. The brother stood quietly, watching. And the years and the distance and the sorrow between them seemed, for that moment, to dissolve like mist in morning sun. There was no language for what passed between them in that embrace. It was older than language. It was the kind of understanding that lives in the body, in the arms, in the way two people can hold each other and say, without a single word, "I know. I know." When they finally stepped apart, her brother spoke quietly through the interpreter. He said that in their tradition, they believe that when someone carries the memory of another person with such devotion across so many years and so many miles, something of that person's spirit lives on in the one who remembers. He looked at the man with an expression that held no anger, only a kind of gentle amazement. And he said, "For us, today is the day our Father has come home." Let those words settle for a moment. Today is the day our Father has come home. Not through anger, not through revenge, not through punishment, through the simple, unbearable, beautiful act of one person saying to another, "I am sorry. I have carried this, and I am here." There is something in this story that touches the very deepest part of what it means to be human. We all cause harm. Not always in such dramatic ways, of course, but in the small, daily ways that accumulate over a lifetime. The sharp word, the turn back, the moment we chose our own comfort over someone else's need. And we carry these things. Sometimes we carry them for years without even realizing how heavy they have become. The Buddhist tradition speaks of this as a kind of knot in the heart. Not a punishment, but a contraction. When we cause harm and do not tend to it, the heart tightens around it, the way a tree grows around a fence wire. Year after year, the bark closes in, and the wire becomes buried, invisible from the outside, but still pressing inward. The wire does not kill the tree. The tree keeps growing, keeps putting out leaves in spring, keeps offering shade in summer. But something inside is restricted. The sap cannot flow as freely. The trunk cannot expand as fully. There is a hidden cost to carrying something that has never been tended to. Forgiveness is not about removing the wire. You cannot go back and undo what has been done. It is not about pretending the wire was never there. That would be dishonest, and dishonesty has never freed anyone. Forgiveness is about the tree finally growing large enough to hold it, to surround it with so much life and so much living wood that the wire, while still present, no longer restricts the flow. The heart grows large enough to hold the sorrow without being strangled by it. And this is not something that happens through willpower or force. It happens through tenderness. It happens through the slow, patient work of bringing kindness to the very places we are most afraid to look. There is a practice in the Buddhist tradition, very ancient and very simple, that consists of just 3 phrases offered silently to oneself. For all the ways I have caused harm, knowingly or unknowingly, I offer forgiveness to myself. For all the ways others have caused me harm, knowingly or unknowingly, I offer forgiveness to them. For all the ways we have caused harm to each other, knowingly or unknowingly, may there be forgiveness between us. These are not magic words. They do not erase the past, but they are like water on dry soil. They soften what has become hard. They open what has become closed. And over time, with patience and repetition, they allow something new to grow in the place where only pain had been living. The man in our story understood this, even if he could not have put it into words. He understood that forgiveness was not about being absolved. It was about being freed. Freed to feel something other than guilt. Freed to give something other than regret. Freed, at last, to let his heart do what it had always wanted to do, which was simply to love. And here is what is remarkable. After that embrace, after the photograph was returned, and the tears were shed, and the words were spoken, this man did not go back to being the same person he had been before. Something opened in him. A lightness came into his face. A warmth came into his voice. The people who knew him said it was as if he had been carrying a heavy pack for decades and had finally, carefully, set it down. He did not forget. He would never forget. But the memory was no longer a wound. It had become something else, something quieter and more gentle. It had become a kind of gratitude. Gratitude for the man who had shown him mercy on a forest path, even though he had not been able to return it. Gratitude for the daughter who, 22 years later, offered what her father could not. Gratitude for the simple, astonishing fact that the human heart, broken as it sometimes is, can grow large enough to hold anything. There is a Zen saying, "The lotus grows in muddy water." Not beside the mud, not in spite of the mud. In it, the most beautiful flower in the garden, the one that artists have painted for thousands of years, the one that sits at the center of so many sacred images, grows in the darkest, thickest, least promising soil there is. It sends its roots down into the murk. It draws its nourishment from the very thing most people would turn away from. And when it finally breaks the surface of the water and opens its petals to the sun, it is spotless. It carries no stain. It is as if the mud never touched it, even though the mud is the very reason it exists. Perhaps that is true for us as well. Perhaps the places in our lives where we feel the most shame, the most regret, the most sorrow are not dead ends. Perhaps they are not evidence that we are broken beyond repair. Perhaps they are the very soil from which our deepest compassion can bloom. Not because suffering is good. It is not. Suffering is simply suffering. But because when we bring tenderness to our suffering instead of judgment, when we meet our pain with the same kindness we would offer to a dear friend, something extraordinary begins to happen. The heart, which had been clenched in self-protection, begins to open. And what flows out when it opens is not weakness. It is not sentimentality. It is a kind of love that only someone who has truly known sorrow can give. A love that does not look down from above, but sits down beside you on the ground. A love that says, I know what it is to be in pain. I know what it is to feel unworthy. And I am here with you, not above you, not beyond you, but right here beside you, because I have been where you are, and I know the way home. That is the gift hidden inside our most difficult moments. And that is why the old teachers, generation after generation, tell us not to run from our pain, but to sit with it, gently, patiently, the way you would sit with a frightened child who has woken in the night and simply needs to know that someone is there. So tonight, if there is something you have been holding, some old regret that still makes your chest tighten when you think of it, perhaps this is a moment to let it breathe. Not to solve it, not to fix it, just to let a little air in, a little space, a little of the same tenderness that a grown woman once offered to a stranger who had traveled across the world to say, I am sorry. You do not have to travel that far. The journey home is much shorter than you think. It begins right here, with one breath, and the quiet willingness to believe that you, too, deserve to set the weight down. Let us rest here for a moment. Feel how your body is settling. Let the breath come and go, easy as a tide. And when you are ready, we will continue together. There is an image in the Buddhist tradition that has stayed with people for thousands of years. It is the image of a bird in flight. Not a particular bird, just a bird, any bird, lifting off the branch and rising into the open sky. And the teaching is this: a bird cannot fly with only one wing. It needs two. If it has only one, no matter how strong that wing is, no matter how hard it beats, the bird will only spin in circles. It will never leave the ground. The two wings of this bird are understanding and compassion, seeing clearly and responding with kindness. And these two wings, working together, are what carry us home to ourselves. Now, this might sound like a teaching about what we should do, but really, it is a teaching about what we already are. Because if you look closely at your own life, you will find that every moment of real peace you have ever known came when both of these wings were open. When you could see what was happening, honestly, without looking away. and when you could meet what you saw with warmth instead of judgment. Tonight, let us look at these two wings more closely. Not as a technique, but as a way of understanding something beautiful about how we are made. Let us begin with the first wing, understanding, seeing clearly. There is an old story about a traveler walking along a country road at dusk. It had been a long day. His feet were sore and his thoughts were heavy, the way thoughts tend to get when the body is tired. The light was fading, and the shadows were stretching themselves across the path like long, dark fingers. And as he came around a bend, he saw something in the road ahead. It was coiled and dark and perfectly still. Every nerve in his body went tight. A snake. Right there in the middle of the path. His heart hammered. His mouth went dry. He stood frozen, unable to move forward, unable to turn back. His mind raced through all the terrible things that might happen if he took even one more step. And so he stood, minute after minute, locked in place by something he had not even touched. Then a farmer came along the same road, carrying a lantern. She was heading home from the fields, humming quietly to herself. She noticed the traveler standing rigid in the path and walked up beside him. "What is the matter?" she asked. "A snake," he whispered, pointing. "Right there. Do you see it?" The farmer lifted her lantern and swung its warm light forward, and the glow fell across the path like a gentle hand. And there, in that light, the traveler saw what was actually there. It was not a snake at all. It was a piece of old rope, left behind by someone who had been tying bundles of hay. Just a rope, frayed and dusty and ordinary, lying in the dirt the way ropes do. The fear did not leave slowly. It left all at once, the way a fist unclenches. One moment he was terrified. The next, he almost laughed. The rope had not changed. The road had not changed. Nothing in the world had shifted even slightly. The only thing that changed was that he could see clearly. This little story has been told in various forms across many traditions, and it points to something profound about how we live. So much of our suffering comes not from what is actually happening, but from what we believe is happening. We see the rope, and we are certain it is a snake. We feel a flutter of anxiety and we are certain it means something is wrong with us. We notice a silence in a conversation and we are certain the other person is disappointed. We look at our lives and we are certain we are falling behind, that everyone else has figured out some secret we have missed. The Buddha had a beautiful way of putting this. He said, "Nothing is as it appears, nor is it otherwise," which is a gentle way of saying things are rarely what our frightened minds tell us they are. But they are also not nothing. The rope is real. The anxiety is real. The silence is real. We do not need to deny what is there. We simply need a little more light to see it for what it actually is. That is the first wing. Not forcing ourselves to see things differently, just bringing a little more light. Now, there is a wonderful story about a Zen teacher and a student that shows what happens when this first wing begins to open. A student came to his teacher one afternoon, looking troubled. He sat down and said, "I have been watching my mind the way you taught me, and I do not like what I see. I am full of jealousy. I compare myself to others constantly. I resent people who seem to have more than I do. I thought that by watching my mind I would become peaceful, but instead I just see how petty and small I am." The teacher listened quietly. Then she said, "Tell me, if you walked into a dark room and lit a candle, would you be upset with the candle for showing you the dust on the shelves? The student thought about this. No, he said slowly. The dust was already there. The candle just helped me see it. Exactly, said the teacher. The candle is not the problem. The dust is not the problem. The problem was the darkness. Now that you can see, you can begin to clean. But gently. You do not need to scrub the shelves with anger. A soft cloth will do. The student sat with this for a moment, turning it over. But what if there is a lot of dust? He asked. The teacher smiled. There is always a lot of dust, she said. That is what shelves are for. That is what candles are for. And that is what soft cloths are for. You will never run out of any of them. This is the gift of the first wing. When we begin to see ourselves clearly, honestly, without flinching, the first thing we often notice is all the dust. All the patterns we do not like. The jealousy, the impatience, the ways we shrink ourselves or puff ourselves up. And the temptation, the very strong temptation, is to judge ourselves for what we see. To say, I should not be like this. Something is wrong with me. But that judgment is not the second wing. That judgment is just more dust. The second wing is compassion. And compassion does not mean feeling sorry for ourselves. It does not mean making excuses or pretending everything is fine. Compassion is something much simpler and much braver than that. It is the willingness to meet what we see with tenderness. There is a story about an old woman who lived at the edge of a village in a small cottage with blue shutters and a low stone wall. She was known throughout the village for her garden, which was unlike any garden her neighbors had ever seen. It was not that her flowers were the biggest or her vegetables the finest. It was that she grew everything. Flowers and weeds together, vegetables alongside wild grasses, bright poppies next to thistles, neat rows of beans tangled with clover. The garden spilled and sprawled and tumbled over itself in a way that should have looked like neglect, but somehow, when you stood in the middle of it, it felt more alive than any garden you had ever visited. Bees loved it. Butterflies gathered there in clouds. When her neighbors asked why she did not pull the weeds, she would shake her head and smile as if they had asked why she did not pull out the sky. One day, a young girl from the village came to visit her. The girl was perhaps 10 years old, with serious eyes and a quiet way about her. She had been having a hard time at home. Her parents argued often, and she felt, the way children do, that somehow the trouble between them was her fault. That if she were different, better, easier, things would be peaceful. She sat on the low wall at the edge of the old woman's garden and looked around at the tangle of blooms and brambles and said, "Why do you let the weeds grow? My mother says, weeds are bad. She says if you do not pull them out, they will take over everything." The old woman sat down beside her. She picked up a small weed, a clover with tiny white flowers, and held it gently in her hand. "Do you know what a weed is?" she asked. The girl shrugged. "A bad plant." "A weed," said the old woman, "is just a plant that someone decided should not be there. That is all. It is not bad. It is just growing where someone thinks it should not grow." She set the clover down in the dirt. "In my garden, nothing is a weed. Everything that grows here belongs here. I do not have to love every plant the same. I do not have to pretend the thorny ones do not scratch. But I do not tear anything out by the roots just because I do not understand why it is here." She looked at the girl with kind eyes. "People are like gardens too, you know. We all have parts of ourselves that someone told us should not be there. The anger, the sadness, the fear. And we spend so much energy trying to rip those parts out, trying to make ourselves into a neat, tidy garden with nothing but flowers. But a garden like that is not alive. Not really. A real garden has everything in it. And a real garden is beautiful because of everything in it, not in spite of it." The girl looked at the clover in the dirt, even the parts that scratch. She asked, "Especially those," said the old woman. "Those are the parts that need the most sunlight." This is the second wing, not pulling out what we do not like, not declaring war on our own insides, but offering sunlight to the parts that scratch, offering warmth to the places that feel cold and unwanted. This is compassion, and it is not weakness. It is perhaps the strongest thing a human being can do. The Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh once described this with great simplicity. He said, "When we have a strong emotion, we can sit with it the way a mother holds her crying baby. She does not know yet what is wrong. She does not need to know. She just holds the baby, and that holding is already enough." Think about that image for a moment. A mother and a crying baby. The baby is upset. Maybe it is hungry. Maybe it is tired. Maybe it is simply overwhelmed by the strangeness of being alive, which is, when you think about it, a perfectly reasonable thing to be overwhelmed by. The mother does not say to the baby, "Stop crying. You should not feel this way. Something is wrong with you for being upset." She does not analyze the crying or try to fix it immediately. She does not open a book and look up the correct solution. She simply picks the baby up and holds it close, her hand on its back, her warmth surrounding it. And in that holding, something shifts. The baby feels the warmth. The baby feels the steadiness. The baby feels that it is not alone. And slowly, gently, the crying begins to soften. Not because the problem was solved, but because the baby remembered that it was held. We can do this with ourselves. We can do this with the anxious part of us that wakes at 3 in the morning, with the jealous part that compares and feels ashamed, with the part that is still carrying something from long ago and does not know how to set it down. We do not have to understand it first. We do not have to fix it or figure it out. We can simply hold it the way a mother holds a child and trust that the holding itself is a kind of healing. That presence, that gentle attention, is the second wing, and it has been part of us since the day we were born. When both wings are open at the same time, when we can see what is here and meet it with kindness, something remarkable happens. We stop spinning in circles. We begin to rise. And rising does not mean escaping our lives. It does not mean floating above our problems or pretending they do not exist. It means seeing our lives from a place that is a little wider, a little more spacious, a little more free. It is like climbing a hill and looking back at the village where you live. The village has not changed. The houses are the same. The streets are the same. But from up here, you can see how the river runs through it, how the fields open beyond it, how the forest stretches to the mountains. You can see that your village, your life, is part of something much larger than what you can see from your front door. From this wider view, the things that seemed so overwhelming on the ground look different. Not small, necessarily. They still matter, but they are held. They are part of a larger landscape that includes not only the shadows, but also the rivers and the fields and the late afternoon light on the hills. There is room for all of it. And there is room for you. The Buddha described this as waking up. Not waking up from life, but waking up to life. Seeing it fully, clearly, with both eyes open and both arms ready to embrace whatever we find. Not just the pleasant parts. Not just the parts that make us feel good about ourselves. All of it. The dust on the shelves. The weeds in the garden. The rope in the road. All of it, held in the warm light of a lantern we did not realize we were carrying all along. There is an ancient Buddhist verse that says, "With the determination of seeing the truth, we look deeply into ourselves and into the world." Not with fear, not with judgment, with determination and with love. Those are the two wings, and they will carry you further than you know. Let us return, for a moment, to the image of the bird. Picture it in your mind. Perhaps it is a crane, white and elegant, standing at the edge of a still lake in the early morning. The mist is rising from the water in soft, slow curls. The air is cool and fresh and carries the smell of wet grass. The world is very quiet, and the crane stands in that quiet, patient and unhurried, the way it has stood every morning since the beginning of mornings. And then, without fuss, without announcement, without any effort that you can see, the crane opens both wings. They spread wide, wider than you expected, and for a moment, the bird is perfectly still, balanced between the earth and the sky. And then it lifts. It lifts the way breath lifts when you stop holding it. The way a smile lifts when something true and kind is said. The two wings move together in a rhythm as old as the wind, and the bird simply rises. Not straining, not struggling, just rising the way it was always meant to. You are that bird. You have always been that bird. Both wings are already part of you. The ability to see clearly has always been there, waiting, like a candle in a quiet room, like a lantern in a farmer's hand. And the ability to respond with kindness has always been there too, natural as breathing, soft as a cloth, wiping dust from a shelf, warm as a mother's arms around a crying child. You do not need to build these wings. You only need to open them. Let us rest here for a moment. Feel the gentle rise and fall of your own breathing, steady as wings in flight. And when you are ready, we will continue together. Have you ever noticed how easy it is to be generous with strangers and how difficult it can be with the people closest to us? We can smile warmly at someone we have never met, offer patience to a colleague, feel genuine compassion for someone on the other side of the world. But then we sit down to a meal with our own family, and within minutes, something tightens. The little irritations begin to hum. The old patterns surface, as familiar and unwelcome as a draft under a door that was never properly sealed. In Zen, there is a saying, "Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water." The deepest truths are not discovered on mountaintops or in silent retreats. They are discovered in kitchens, in traffic, in the middle of an argument about who forgot to call, in the quiet frustration of watching someone you love do the very thing you have asked them 100 times not to do. This is where the real work happens, not in the extraordinary moments, but in the ordinary ones. And tonight, let us walk through one of those ordinary moments together and see what it has to teach us. Let us explore a story about a woman who went home for the holidays one winter. She had been studying and practicing for many years. She meditated each morning. She read the old teachings. She considered herself, on the whole, a fairly patient and aware person. She was not perfect, and she knew it, but she felt she had come a long way from the reactive, anxious person she had once been. She had tools now. She had understanding. She had grown. And then she walked through her family's front door. It started small, the way it always does. Her sister was not helping with the cooking. Her brother had arrived late and immediately disappeared into another room. Two of her relatives were exchanging the kind of sharp, pointed comments that sound polite on the surface but carry something cold underneath. One of her children had barely said hello before heading out to spend time with friends, leaving her standing in the hallway with her coat still on, feeling oddly invisible. Within an hour, she was irritated with everyone. Within 2 hours, she was silently composing a detailed list of everything that was wrong with each person in the house. He is selfish. She is passive. They are childish. Nobody helps. Nobody notices. Nobody cares. It was like a storm that had blown in from nowhere. One moment she was fine. The next, the world was full of people who were failing her. Now, if you have ever been in this situation, and most of us have, you know how convincing it feels. When judgment gets going, it has a momentum to it, like a wheel rolling downhill. Each new observation feeds the last. Every small slight confirms the story. And the story feels absolutely true. Of course they are being difficult. Of course this is their fault. Anyone would feel this way. There is an old Buddhist teaching about this. It says that anger is like picking up a burning stick to throw at someone. Before it ever reaches them, it is already scorching your own hand. And judgment works the same way. Every sharp thought we aim outward burns us first. But we are usually so focused on the target that we do not notice our own hand is on fire. This woman noticed. Not right away. It took a while. But at some point during the afternoon, as she was washing dishes and mentally cataloguing her family's shortcomings, a small, clear voice inside her said, "You are judging everyone, and you are miserable." It was such a simple observation, but it stopped her, because she realized it was true. She was not just noticing problems. She was actively looking for them. She was scanning each person like a searchlight, hunting for flaws. And every flaw she found made her feel a tiny bit more righteous and a tiny bit more alone. She dried her hands, put on her coat, and went for a walk. It was late afternoon, and the air was cold and still. The kind of cold that makes the world feel very quiet, as if everything has decided to stop and listen. The light was low and golden, the way winter light gets in the last hour before sunset, and the trees were bare, their branches tracing delicate patterns against the pale sky. Somewhere nearby, a bird called out once and then was silent, and the silence that followed was so complete it felt like a living thing. She walked without any particular destination, past houses with lit windows and the faint smell of wood smoke, past a pond that had gone still and grey. She just needed to move. She just needed to feel the ground beneath her feet and the cold air on her face, and something other than the hot, tight knot of irritation that had been building in her chest all day. Each step felt like a small act of honesty. I am not okay right now. Something is hurting. I do not know what. As she walked, she began to pay attention to what was actually happening inside her. Not the story about her family. Not the list of grievances. Not the courtroom argument she had been building in her head all afternoon, in which she was the judge and everyone else was on trial. But the raw, physical sensation of what she was feeling, the actual texture of it in her body, and what she found surprised her. Underneath the irritation, underneath the judgment, underneath all those sharp, certain thoughts about what everyone else was doing wrong, there was something much softer, much more vulnerable, much more sad, like finding a small animal curled up at the bottom of a well. It was a feeling she recognized, the way you recognize a face you have not seen in a long time. A face from childhood, perhaps, familiar and a little startling. It was the feeling of not being good enough. This is one of the most important things the Buddhist teachings point us toward. That judgment of others and judgment of ourselves are not two separate things. They are two ends of the same stick. When we find ourselves harshly criticizing the people around us, it is almost always because, somewhere inside, we are harshly criticizing ourselves. The outward judgment is loud and obvious. The inward judgment is quiet and hidden. But the quiet one is the one that is actually running the show. The Buddha put it simply, you will not be punished for your anger. You will be punished by your anger. And what he meant, at its deepest level, is that the real cost of our reactivity is not what it does to other people. It is what it does to us. It locks us inside a very small room, and then it convinces us that the room is the whole world. This woman, walking through the cold air, began to see the shape of that room. She saw that underneath all the criticism of her family, there was a belief she had been carrying for a very long time. A belief that said, if everyone is unhappy, it is probably my fault. If things are not harmonious, I should be fixing them. And if I cannot fix them, then I am failing. And if I am failing, then something is wrong with me. It had been there for years, maybe decades, running quietly in the background like a machine in a basement that you have gotten so used to hearing that you have forgotten it is on. But it was on. It was always on. And it colored everything. She kept walking. The light continued to fade. A few early stars appeared above the trees, faint and patient. And she noticed something else. Something that arrived not as a thought but as a feeling in the body. A kind of sadness. Not the sharp sadness of a specific loss, but something wider and softer. A sadness for all the moments, and there had been so many, when she had been quietly at war with herself without even knowing it. All the dinners and holidays and ordinary afternoons, when, underneath whatever she was doing and saying, there was this low hum, you are not doing enough. You are not being enough. Try harder. Do better. In Zen, they sometimes call this the comparing mind. The mind that is always measuring the distance between where we are and where we think we should be. It is a tireless mind. It wakes before we do. It works through lunch. It follows us to bed. It measures everything, our appearance, our achievements, our patience, our parenting, our progress, against some invisible standard that it never quite reveals. And the comparing mind never rests. It never says, "Okay, that is enough. You have arrived. You can stop now." It always finds a new gap, a new shortfall, a new reason to keep striving. It is like a horizon that moves as you walk toward it. No matter how far you go, it is always the same distance away. She realized, standing at the edge of a field, with the cold air on her cheeks and the first stars beginning to appear, that she had been listening to this mind for most of her life. It had been the soundtrack of her days, so constant that she had mistaken it for her own voice. She had thought the comparing mind was her. She had thought its judgments were the truth. And she realized something else. She was tired of it. Not angry at it. Not even disappointed. Just tired. The way you get tired of a song that has been playing on repeat for too long. You do not hate the song. It may even be a fine song. You just want a little silence. A little space. A little room to hear something else. Something quieter. Something kinder that has been trying to reach you underneath the noise. And this is where something shifted. She did not do anything dramatic. She did not have a vision or a breakthrough or a moment of cosmic clarity. There was no flash of light. No voice from the heavens. She simply put her hand on her own chest, the way you might comfort a friend who was upset, and she stood there in the winter quiet and let herself feel what she was feeling. The sadness, the tiredness, the ache of having been so hard on herself for so long. She did not try to fix it. She did not try to understand it or explain it or make it go away. She just let it be there, the way you let the cold air be there, the way you let the stars be there. Present. Real. Not good or bad. Just part of this moment. Part of being alive on a winter evening on a small planet spinning through space. And as she stood with her hand on her heart, something loosened. Not everything. Not all at once. But something. It was like a window opening in a room that had been sealed shut for a long time. Just a crack. But through that crack came air, and the air was fresh, and it changed the quality of the whole room. The tight knot in her chest began to soften. The heat of her irritation began to cool. And in its place, there was a strange, quiet tenderness, a gentleness toward herself that she had not felt in a long time. Maybe had not felt ever, not quite like this. Not this honest. Not this simple. Not this free of conditions. She thought of something she had once read, a line attributed to an ancient teacher. If your compassion does not include yourself, it is incomplete. And she realized, with a clarity that was more like a whisper than a shout, that she had been trying to offer compassion to the whole world while skipping the one person who needed it most. She had been pouring water for everyone else while her own cup sat empty on the table. When she went back inside, the house had not changed. Her sister was still not helping. Her relatives were still trading their quiet barbs. Her child was still out with friends. Nothing in the external world had shifted even slightly. But she had shifted. Something in the way she saw it all had opened. Where before she had seen a house full of people who were failing, she now saw a house full of people who were doing their best. Her sister, who did not help with cooking, had always been shy in groups and probably felt overwhelmed. Her brother, who had disappeared, had always needed time alone to recharge. Her relatives, with their sharp comments, were carrying their own old hurts and did not know how to set them down. Her child, out with friends, was simply growing up the way children are supposed to. None of this meant the difficulties were not real. They were real, but they were no longer the whole story. They were clouds, as we spoke of earlier in our journey tonight. Real clouds, casting real shadows, but not the sky. Never the sky. And most importantly, the harshest judgment, the one aimed at herself, the one that said it was all her fault, had quieted. Not disappeared, but quieted. Like a voice that has been shouting for so long that when you finally turn and look at it with gentle eyes, it realizes it does not need to shout anymore. It just needed to be heard. This is something we can all recognize. We do not need to be meditators or practitioners or spiritual seekers to understand this. We simply need to be human. Because every one of us has had that moment when we suddenly realize that the person we have been hardest on is ourselves. And every one of us has had that moment, however brief, when something softens and we feel, even for a second, that it might be okay to stop fighting. The great Zen master Dogen wrote, "To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be at home in all things." What he meant, in the gentlest way, is that when we stop obsessing over whether we are good enough, when we finally let go of that endless, exhausting project of self-improvement, something natural and warm takes the place of all that worry. We do not become careless or lazy or indifferent. Quite the opposite. We become free. Free to see others clearly, as they actually are, rather than as reflections of our own insecurity. Free to love without keeping score. Free to be imperfect without believing that imperfection is the same as failure. Free to sit at a dinner table with our complicated, messy, beautiful family and think, simply, here we are, all of us doing our best. And that is enough. That winter walk, that ordinary walk in the cold, changed nothing and changed everything. The woman went back to her family. She hung her coat by the door. She helped with dinner. She laughed at something someone said, and it was a real laugh, not the polite kind. She sat beside her brother and asked him how he was doing, and this time she actually listened to the answer, not while planning her next sentence, not while judging, but with her whole quiet attention. Not because she had been fixed, not because she had reached some elevated state, but because, for a little while, the comparing mind had gone quiet. And in the quiet, there was room for something else. Something warmer, something older, something that had been waiting patiently beneath all that noise for exactly this. So if you find yourself, in the days to come, catching the familiar rise of judgment, the tightening in the chest, the certainty that everyone around you is doing it wrong, you might consider this. Not as a correction, not as a rule, just as a gentle invitation. What if the sharpness you feel toward others is a signal? Not that they need to change, but that something in you is asking to be held. Something small and tender and a little bit afraid. Something that just needs you to put your hand on your chest and say, quietly, I see you. It is all right. You are doing fine. That is enough. That is more than enough. Let us rest here for a moment. Feel the stillness around you. Let your body be soft. And when you are ready, we will continue together. If you have ever sat down to meditate, even for just a few minutes, you have noticed something interesting. You close your eyes. You settle your body. You bring your attention to your breathing. And for a moment, maybe two, you are right here. Present. Quiet. Home. And then, without any warning at all, you are somewhere else entirely. You are replaying a conversation from yesterday. You are planning what to have for dinner. You are worrying about something that may never happen. You are remembering an embarrassment from years ago, and your cheeks flush as if it is happening right now. The breath is still moving, the room is still quiet, but you have vanished from it. You have floated away like a leaf on a stream, carried gently but completely into a world made entirely of thought. And then, just as suddenly, you come back. Oh, right. I was breathing. Here I am. This small, ordinary cycle, the drifting away and the returning, is one of the most important things a human being can notice. Because it does not only happen on a cushion with our eyes closed. It happens all day long. It happens all life long. We forget and we remember. We lose ourselves and we find ourselves again. Over and over and over, like the tide going out and coming back. Tonight, let us look at this rhythm of forgetting and remembering. Not to fix it, not to conquer it, but to understand it as something deeply natural, deeply human, and strangely beautiful. The Buddha spoke about this rhythm at the very beginning of his teaching. When he sat with his first students and shared what he had discovered, he did not begin by saying, "Here is how to be perfect." He began by saying something much more honest. He said, "There is suffering." That was his starting point, not as a grim declaration, but as a relief, an exhale, a naming of what everyone in the room already knew but had never heard spoken aloud with such simple clarity. There is suffering. We forget who we are. We lose touch with the goodness we have been exploring together tonight. We get tangled up in worry and comparison and the endless effort to make ourselves into something we think we should be. This is not a personal failing. This is the weather of being human. It rains on everyone. What made the Buddha's teaching so remarkable is what came next. He did not say, "And therefore life is hopeless." He said, "There is a way through. Not around. Not above. Through. Right through the middle of our forgetting, there is a path back to remembering. And every single time we take that path, no matter how many times we have wandered off it, we arrive home." But before we talk about remembering, let us spend a little time with forgetting. Because there is something important here that most of us miss. When we notice that we have drifted, that we have gotten caught up in a pattern we do not like, our first instinct is usually to scold ourselves. There I go again. Why can I not stop doing this? What is wrong with me? We treat forgetting as evidence that we are failing, as if the whole point of being alive is to never lose our footing, and every stumble is proof that we are not up to the task. The Buddha had a beautiful way of describing this. He called it the second arrow. Let us explore what he meant. Imagine you are walking through a forest. It is a calm day. The light is dappled and green, filtering through the leaves in patterns that shift and dance with the breeze. The path is soft underfoot, and there is the smell of earth and moss, and something sweet you cannot quite name. It is a good walk. Your body is relaxed. Your mind is easy. And then, out of nowhere, you step on a thorn. It pierces your foot. It hurts. A sharp, sudden sting that stops you in your tracks. This is the first arrow. It is not your fault. You did not choose to step on it. You were simply walking, and the thorn was there, hidden beneath a leaf, and the two of you met. That is all. A moment of pain on an otherwise lovely path. Now, you have a choice about what happens next. You can stop, sit down on a nearby rock, carefully remove the thorn, tend to the small wound, perhaps wrap it with a strip of cloth, and continue on your way. The foot will ache for a little while, and then it will heal, and eventually you will forget it ever happened. Or you can do what most of us actually do. You can stand there on one foot and launch into a full investigation of your own character. I cannot believe I stepped on a thorn. I should have been paying more attention. What kind of person steps on a thorn? A careless person, that is who. I always do things like this. I should have watched where I was going. I should have worn better shoes. Everyone else manages to walk through forests without stepping on thorns. What is wrong with me? That is the second arrow. And here is the strange thing about it. The second arrow almost always hurts more than the first. The thorn was a moment of pain, sharp and real, but brief. The story we build around it can last for hours, for days, for years. The thorn breaks the skin. The story breaks the spirit. The thorn will heal on its own in a day or two. The story, if we keep telling it, never heals at all. We do this constantly, in ways large and small, and we have been doing it for so long that we hardly notice anymore. We feel anxious, and then we feel ashamed of feeling anxious. We lose our temper, and then we lose our temper with ourselves for losing our temper. We eat something we wished we had not, and then we spend the rest of the day punishing ourselves for it, which feels so much worse than the eating ever did. The original experience, the first arrow, is usually manageable. It is the story we wrap around it, the second arrow, that makes it unbearable. There is a Zen story about this that is very short and very wise. A student came to his teacher and said, "I am discouraged. I keep getting distracted during meditation. My mind will not stay still." The teacher said, "How wonderful that you noticed. That is the whole story, and it contains everything. How wonderful that you noticed. Not how terrible that you drifted. Not try harder next time. How wonderful that you noticed. Because the noticing is the remembering. The moment you realize you have been lost in thought is not a failure. It is the opposite of failure. It is the exact moment of waking up. It is the moment the tide turns and begins its journey back to shore. Let us sit with this, because it turns something on its head that most of us have believed for a very long time. We tend to think that the goal is to never forget, to reach some state of permanent awareness where we never drift, never react, never get caught in an old pattern. And because that is our goal, every time we do forget, every time we do drift, we experience it as a defeat. But what if forgetting is not the opposite of awakening? What if it is part of it? What if the rhythm of losing ourselves and finding ourselves again is not a sign that we are doing it wrong, but the very heartbeat of a life that is learning to come home? Think of learning to walk. No child learns to walk without falling. A child pulls herself up on the edge of a table, takes one wobbling step, maybe two, and then sits down hard on the floor. Does anyone look at that child and say, Well, she tried walking and she failed. She should probably give up? Of course not. Everyone smiles. Everyone claps. Because the falling is not the failure of walking. It is the practice of walking. It is how the body learns what balance feels like from the inside. And every time the child falls and gets up again, something strengthens. Not just the legs, but something deeper. A kind of trust. A willingness to try again. An understanding, felt in the bones rather than thought in the mind, that falling is not the end. Getting up is what matters. Getting up is the whole beautiful thing. We are all still learning to walk. We are all still falling and getting up. And the old teachers, the wise and patient ones, they do not stand at the end of the path waiting for us to arrive without stumbling. They sit down beside us on the ground and say, "Yes, I fell too. Many times. Would you like to get up together?" The ancient teacher, Shantideva, wrote, "Where would I find enough leather to cover the surface of the earth? But wearing leather on the soles of my feet is equivalent to covering the whole earth. We cannot make the world smooth. We cannot remove every thorn from every path. But we can learn to walk with a kind of gentle awareness that makes the thorns less devastating when they come. Not because we avoid them, but because we stop shooting ourselves with that second arrow when we step on one." There is a lovely old story about a monk who lived in a mountain hermitage. It was a simple place, just a few rooms and a small garden where he grew herbs and onions and a single persimmon tree. He was known throughout the region for his calmness and his kindness, and students would travel great distances to sit with him, sometimes waiting days for a chance to ask a question. One day, a young student arrived, dusty from the road, with the eager, slightly anxious energy of someone who has been traveling for a long time towards something they desperately want to find. He bowed and sat down across from the monk and said, "Teacher, I have heard that you have attained great peace, that your mind is always still, that you never lose yourself in anger or fear or confusion. Is this true?" The old monk laughed. It was a real laugh, full and warm and entirely unexpected, and it took the student by surprise. He had been expecting solemnity. He had been expecting wisdom delivered in a whisper. He had not been expecting this. "Who told you that?" the monk asked, still chuckling. "Everyone says it," the student replied, a little uncertain now. "They say you are beyond suffering." The monk shook his head, still smiling. He reached for a cup of tea that sat on the table beside him. A simple clay cup, brown and worn, and slightly chipped at the rim. He held it out so the student could see it. "Do you see this cup?" he asked. "Yes," said the student. "I drop this cup at least once a week," the monk said. "Sometimes twice. Sometimes I drop it because I am tired. Sometimes because I am distracted. Sometimes because my hands are cold and clumsy in the morning. And every time I drop it, the tea spills, and I have to clean it up and start again." He set the cup down gently on the table. "The difference between me and a person who has not practiced is not that I never drop the cup. It is that I no longer scold myself when I do. I do not stand over the spilled tea saying, 'What kind of monk drops his cup?' I simply pick it up. I refill it. I take a sip. That is all. I pick it up." The student sat with this. It was not what he had expected. He had come looking for perfection, for someone who had transcended the mess of being human. And instead, he had found a man who dropped his cup once a week and was completely at peace with it. But is that not a very small thing? he asked. The monk looked at him with great tenderness. It is the only thing, he said quietly. Everything else follows from it. This is the teaching at the heart of what we are exploring tonight, and it connects to everything we have been walking through together. We spoke about the sun behind the clouds, about the hand that holds our pain, about forgiveness and understanding and compassion. And what ties all of it together, the golden thread that runs through every story and every teaching, is this simple rhythm. We forget and we remember. We forget that we are good. We forget that we belong. We forget that the pain we are feeling is a thorn, not a verdict. We forget, and we reach for the second arrow, and we build a story about how we are broken and unworthy and beyond repair. This is what humans do. This is what we have always done. Not because we are weak, but because we are tender, and the world is sometimes sharp, and the mind is trying, in its confused and clumsy way, to protect us from getting hurt again. And then, sometimes in the quiet, sometimes in the cold air of a winter walk, sometimes in the warmth of another person's hand, sometimes while watching the light change on a hillside, sometimes for no reason at all, we remember. We remember that we are more than the story. We remember that the cup can always be refilled. We remember that the one who notices the forgetting is already awake, already here, already home. And in that moment of remembering, however brief, however fragile, however quickly the next wave of forgetting comes rolling in, we are home, truly home. Not because we have arrived at some permanent state of bliss, but because we have touched something real, something that cannot be lost, only forgotten, and something that is always, always available to be found again. The great teacher Ajahn Chah once said, "If you let go a little, you will have a little peace. If you let go a lot, you will have a lot of peace. If you let go completely, you will have complete peace." And what we are letting go of, most of the time, is not our problems. It is the second arrow. It is the story that says our problems mean something is wrong with us. Let go of that story, even for a breath, and something opens. Something that was always there, waiting quietly beneath the noise. So let us carry this with us as we continue, not as a rule to follow, not as one more thing to get right, but as a kindness, a gentleness with ourselves that says, of course you forget. Everyone forgets. The Buddha himself said that forgetting is the most natural thing in the world. It is woven into the fabric of being alive. But remembering is also woven into that fabric. And every time you remember, every time you catch yourself mid-drift and say, "Oh, there I am," you are doing something quiet and powerful. You are choosing to come back. You are choosing to pick up the cup. You are choosing, in that small, unremarkable moment, to trust that you are worth coming back to. And you are. You always have been. Every moment of remembering proves it. Not because you are perfect, but because you are here, still trying, still turning toward the light, still willing to begin again. There is a line from an old Zen poem, 10,000 flowers in spring, the moon in autumn, a cool breeze in summer, snow in winter. If your mind is not clouded by unnecessary things, this is the best season of your life. Every season, not just the easy ones, not just the ones where everything goes well. Every season, even this one, especially this one. Let us pause here. Notice how you are resting, Let your breath be easy, coming and going like a guest who knows it is always welcome. And when you are ready, we will continue together. When you were very small, before you had words for anything, before you knew what a tree was, or what the color blue meant, or what your own name sounded like, you already knew the language of touch. You knew the difference between hands that were gentle and hands that were hurried. You knew the feeling of being lifted and held against a warm chest. You knew, without anyone teaching you, that when someone placed their hand softly on your back, it meant you were safe. You could rest. This is the oldest language we have, older than any spoken word, older than writing, older than song. Before we learn to say, "I love you," we learn to feel it through the skin. A palm on a forehead, fingers wrapped around a hand, an arm around a shoulder. The body has always known what the mind sometimes forgets, that we are not meant to carry everything alone. That sometimes the most important thing one person can offer another is not advice, not wisdom, not even understanding. Just contact, just warmth, just the simple animal comfort of being touched by someone who cares. Tonight, let us explore this quiet language and what it can teach us about coming home to ourselves. There is a story about a healer who lived in a small village by the sea. People came to her from many miles around, not because she had unusual medicines or secret knowledge, but because of something much simpler. She listened. And when she listened, she had a habit, almost unconscious, of reaching out and placing her hand on the other person's arm or shoulder. Just lightly. Just enough to say, without words, "I am here." One day, a fisherman came to see her. He was a large, weathered man with deep lines around his eyes and hands that looked like they had been carved from driftwood. Not the kind of person you would expect to see visiting a healer. He sat down across from her, in a wooden chair that creaked under his weight, and he looked at the floor for a long time before speaking. When he did speak, his voice was gruff, almost apologetic. He said he did not know why he had come. He was not sick. Nothing was wrong, not the kind of wrong a healer could fix, anyway. He just had not been sleeping. For weeks now, he would lie in his bed and stare at the ceiling, and his mind would begin its nightly patrol, marching through everything he had done wrong that day, that year, that lifetime. Every harsh word he had ever spoken. Every moment he had let someone down. Every failure, large and small, lined up and waiting for inspection. By morning he was more exhausted than when he had lain down. "I feel like my own mind is punishing me," he said, "and I do not know how to make it stop." The healer listened. She did not interrupt. She did not offer advice or ask probing questions. She simply sat with him the way the sea sits with the shore, steady and unhurried. When he finished talking, she reached across and placed her hand on his forearm. Just rested it there. His arm was rough and brown from years in the sun and salt, and her hand was small against it. She did not squeeze or pat or rub. She just let her hand be there, warm and still, like a small animal that has settled and decided to stay. They sat like that for a while. The sound of the sea came through the open window, that slow, rhythmic breathing of the waves that is perhaps the oldest lullaby the earth has ever sung. The light in the room was warm and golden, and the shadows were soft. After a time, the fisherman's shoulders, which had been drawn up tight around his ears like a wall, began to lower. His breathing, which had been shallow and quick, began to slow. His jaw, which had been clenched like a fist, softened. He did not say anything. He did not need to. Something was happening in a language older than words. When he finally stood to leave, he looked at her with an expression that was half confusion and half wonder. "What did you do?" he asked. She smiled. "Nothing," she said. "I just stayed." There is real wisdom in this story, and it is wisdom that goes beyond any single tradition or teaching. The body responds to caring touch in ways that the mind cannot replicate on its own. When someone touches us with genuine warmth, something shifts at the deepest level of our being. The part of us that is always on guard, always scanning for danger, always bracing for the next problem, that part begins to stand down. It is as if the body hears a message that the mind has been too busy to receive. You are safe. You can let go. You are held. Researchers have studied this in many different ways. They have found that when a person is anxious or afraid, and someone they trust takes their hand, the fear quiets remarkably fast. It does not disappear through argument or reason. It quiets through contact, through the wordless message that travels from one body to another, saying, "I am here with you." They have found that when a doctor, during an ordinary visit, simply places a hand on a patient's shoulder for a moment, the patient leaves feeling that the visit lasted twice as long. Twice as long. Not because time changed, but because touch changes how we experience time. It slows things down. It makes us feel that we matter, that we are not just a number or a problem to be solved, but a person. A warm, breathing, tender person. And perhaps, most beautifully, they have found that even our relationship with ourselves changes when touch is involved. When we place a hand on our own heart, gently, with the same tenderness we might offer to someone we love, the body responds as if it is being comforted by another person. The breathing deepens. The muscles soften. Something that was braced begins to let go. It is as though the body does not entirely distinguish between the touch of another and the touch of the self, as long as the intention behind it is kind. In the Buddhist tradition, there is a deep understanding that the body is not separate from the path of awakening. The body is the path. The Buddha himself, after years of trying to transcend the body through extreme discipline, finally sat down beneath a tree and simply felt. He felt the earth beneath him. He felt the air on his skin. He felt the weight of his own body held by the ground. And it was in that moment of coming back to the body, not escaping it, that he woke up. There is something in this for all of us. We spend so much of our lives in our heads, trapped in the endless loop of thinking, planning, worrying, remembering. The body waits below, patient as the earth, carrying us through each day without complaint, and we barely notice it at all. We notice it when it hurts. We notice it when it fails to meet our expectations. But how often do we simply appreciate it? How often do we place a hand on our own chest and say, not with words, but with touch, "Thank you. Thank you for carrying me through this day. Thank you for breathing while I was busy worrying. Thank you for being here." The Zen tradition places great emphasis on the body. In Zen monasteries, even the simplest physical acts, pouring tea, sweeping a floor, walking down a hallway, are treated as sacred. Not because there is anything magical about sweeping, but because When we bring our full attention to the body, to the feeling of the broom in our hands, to the sound of the bristles on the stone, we come out of our heads and back into the living, breathing world. We remember what is real. And what is real is always, always happening in the body. Let us explore another story. There was once a teacher who worked with people who were going through very difficult times. One of the things she noticed, over many years of listening to people's pain, was that often the most powerful moment in a conversation was not when she said the right words. It was when she said nothing at all and simply offered her presence. She began to notice something else too. When people were caught in deep shame or self-blame, when they were locked inside that small, airless room of "something is wrong with me," words often could not reach them. It was as if the door to that room was sealed, and no amount of knocking from the outside could open it. But touch could. She began, gently and with permission, to invite people to do something very simple during those difficult moments. She would ask them to place their own hand over their own heart, not as a technique, not as a fix, not as something with steps and rules and a correct way to do it, just as a gesture, a way of saying to themselves, through the body, what the mind was not yet ready to hear. The way you might put your arm around a friend who is crying and say nothing at all because nothing needs to be said. And what she found, again and again, was that this small gesture could unlock something that hours of conversation could not. There was something about the warmth of one's own hand, something about the weight of it resting there on the chest that spoke directly to the part of us that is hurting. It bypassed all the arguments and defenses and explanations and went straight to the heart of the matter, which is, of course, the heart itself. There was a woman who had been carrying guilt for years and could not find her way through it. She could talk about it endlessly. She could analyze it from every angle. She could understand it intellectually, could explain exactly why she felt the way she felt, and where it came from, and what it meant. But the guilt lived in her body, not her mind, and it was her body that needed to hear that it was okay. When she placed her hand on her chest and simply sat with herself, not trying to solve anything, not trying to be anywhere else, something melted. Not the guilt itself, which was real and needed its own time, but the armor around the guilt, the hard protective shell that had been keeping the pain locked in, like a room with no windows. Her hand on her heart was the first window, and through it air began to flow. There was also a man who had spent his whole life believing he was not good enough. He was successful by any external measure, the kind of person other people looked at and thought, he has it all figured out. But inside, there was a coldness, a distance from himself, as if he were standing outside his own life, looking in through a frosted window. He had tried many things to warm that coldness. Achievement, recognition, staying busy every waking moment so the silence could never catch up with him. None of it worked, because none of it touched the place that was actually cold. But when he learned, slowly and with great skepticism, to simply place his hand over his heart each morning and to sit with whatever he found there, not pushing it away, not judging it, just being with it the way the sea is with the shore, something began to thaw. Not dramatically, not overnight, but steadily, the way ice melts in spring. Not because someone pushed it, because the sun came out. There is a line from a poet that captures this beautifully. She writes about finding all the untended places within herself, all the parts that had been ignored or pushed away or told they were not welcome. And she describes lifting them, one by one, close to her heart, and whispering, "Holy, holy." Not fixing them, not improving them, not understanding them, just holding them close and calling them sacred. This is what touch can do. Not the touch of a doctor or a therapist, though that can be powerful too, but the touch you offer to yourself, the hand on the heart, the palm on the cheek, the fingers resting gently on your own arm. These are not empty gestures. They are communications. They are the body's way of saying, in a language it has understood since before you were born, "I am here. I am not leaving. You matter." The Buddha once said, "You can search throughout the entire universe for someone who is more deserving of your love and affection than you are yourself, and that person is not to be found anywhere. Not anywhere. Not in any direction. The person most deserving of your tenderness is already here, already breathing, already listening to these words." There is one more story worth sitting with tonight. In many parts of the world, there is a tradition of holding the hands of those who are suffering. Not to take the suffering away, not to fix or solve or analyze, just to hold. It is one of the oldest gestures our species knows, and it crosses every boundary of language and culture and belief. A man once told a story about visiting his elderly grandmother when she was nearing the end of a long and full life. She was resting in her bed, propped up on pillows that seemed to hold her the way clouds hold the moon, gently and without effort. The room was quiet, and the afternoon light was coming through the curtains in soft, buttery stripes that moved slowly across the bedspread as the hours passed. There were flowers on the nightstand, and the faint scent of lavender, and somewhere in the house, a clock was ticking, steady and patient as a heartbeat. He sat beside her in a chair that had been pulled close to the bed, and he did not know what to say. He had come prepared with things to talk about, news and updates and cheerful stories from the family. He had rehearsed them in the car on the way over, wanting to be bright, wanting to fill the room with life. But when he sat down and looked at her face, so peaceful and so familiar, all of those things seemed small and far away, like sounds from another room that no longer mattered. So instead, he simply took her hand. Her hand was thin and cool and light as paper, and it rested in his palm the way a fallen leaf rests on still water. He held it between both of his, the way you hold something precious that you know you cannot keep forever. And they sat together in the quiet, and neither of them spoke. The clock ticked. The light moved. The flowers held their scent, and something in the silence between them was more full, more complete than any conversation could have been. After a long while, his grandmother opened her eyes and looked at him, and she said, very softly, "That is the nicest thing anyone has done for me all week." He looked at their hands together. "I did not do anything," he said. She smiled. "Exactly," she said. "You just stayed. You just stayed." The same words the healer used. The same truth, arriving from a different direction. The most profound thing we can offer another person, and the most profound thing we can offer ourselves, is not brilliance, not solutions, not the perfect words at the perfect time. It is presence, the willingness to stay, to be here, in the body, in the moment, with whatever is arising, and to not run away. So tonight, as you lie here, you might notice your own body, not with judgment, not with a measuring eye that says this should be different or that should be better, but with the kind of attention you would give to a sleeping child. Gentle, curious, full of warmth. Notice your hands wherever they are resting. Notice the weight of them, the warmth of them. These hands that have done so much for you, that have held and carried and reached out and let go, that have wiped tears and opened doors and written words and prepared meals and touched the people you love. And if it feels right, let one of those hands come to rest on your chest, lightly, as if you are saying hello to yourself, as if you are saying, after a long and busy day, after a long and busy life, I am here. I stayed. Let us rest here. Feel the warmth of your own hand, the steady rhythm beneath it. And when you are ready, we will continue together. We have walked a long, gentle road together tonight. We have sat with monks in mountain monasteries and healers by the sea. We have watched the sun shining above the clouds and held a circle drawn in the center of a palm. We have picked up dropped cups and pulled thorns from our feet and stood in winter fields watching the stars appear. And through it all, a single thread has been quietly weaving itself through every story, every teaching, every pause. Nothing is wrong with you. Not in the way you have feared. Not in the way that quiet voice has whispered. Not in the way the world has sometimes made you believe. You are not a problem to be solved. You are a life to be lived. And the goodness at the center of that life has been here all along, patient as the ground beneath your feet, waiting for you to stop and notice and rest. Now, as we come to the last stretch of our journey, let us sit together with a question. A question so simple it might surprise you. What happens when we actually begin to trust this? What happens when, even a little, we stop fighting ourselves? There is something that gardeners know, something they rarely talk about because it seems too obvious to mention. When you stop pulling at a plant, it grows. When you stop digging it up every few days to check whether the roots are strong enough, to measure whether it is tall enough, to compare it to the plant next door, it simply does what it was always going to do. It reaches for the light. It opens. It blooms. Not because you forced it, but because you finally got out of the way. Human beings are not so different. We spend enormous amounts of energy holding ourselves in check, monitoring ourselves, measuring ourselves, tightening against some imagined standard that we can never quite reach. And all of that tightening takes something from us. It takes our aliveness. It takes the simple, natural energy of being a creature on this earth, breathing and moving and feeling the wind. The first thing that happens when we begin to trust our own goodness, when we begin to relax even a little into the truth that we are okay, is that this energy comes back. Not as excitement or agitation, but as a kind of quiet vitality, a brightness, like opening the curtains in a room that has been dark for too long, and suddenly everything is lit up, the same furniture, the same walls, the same life, but seen in full color for the first time in a while. Let us explore a story about this. There was an old calligrapher who lived in a small town at the foot of a mountain range. He had practiced his art for decades, and his work was admired by many. But as he grew older, he became increasingly critical of his own brushstrokes. He would sit at his table each morning, grind the ink, prepare the paper, and then freeze. His hand, which had once moved with such fluid grace, would hover above the page, trembling, not because he had forgotten how to write, but because he had become so afraid of making an imperfect mark. Day after day, he would sit and stare at the blank paper, and the blank paper would stare back, and the morning would pass, and the ink would dry in the stone, and he would put everything away, having written nothing. One afternoon, an old friend came to visit. She was not a calligrapher. She was a farmer, with dirt under her nails and laugh lines around her mouth, and the kind of ease that comes from spending your life working with things that grow. She found him at his table, staring at the empty page. She sat down beside him and watched for a while. Then she said, "What are you waiting for?" He sighed. "I am waiting until I can do it perfectly." She looked at the blank page. She looked at the dried ink. She looked at his trembling hand. Then she picked up the brush, dipped it in water since the ink had dried, and drew a large, wobbly, completely imperfect circle on the page. It was lopsided. It was uneven. It dripped at the bottom where she had pressed too hard. He stared at it, horrified. "That is terrible," he said. She laughed. "Yes," she said, "and it is the most alive thing in this room." He looked at the circle again. It was terrible. It really was. But there was something about it. Something loose and free and unapologetic. Something that his perfect, careful, fearful hand had not produced in years. "Do you know what the Zen masters say about the circle?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "They say it represents wholeness, completeness. And do they draw it perfectly?" she asked. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, very slowly, a smile spread across his face. It was the first real smile his friend had seen on him in a long time. He picked up the brush, dipped it in fresh ink, and in one quick, imperfect, completely alive motion, he drew a circle. It was not perfect. The line was thick in some places and thin in others. It did not quite close at the top, but his hand was not trembling anymore. This is the first gift that comes when we stop demanding perfection from ourselves. Energy returns. Not the anxious energy of trying to get it right, but the natural energy of a life that is being lived instead of controlled. The Zen masters had a phrase for this way of being, without anxiety about imperfection. What a beautiful handful of words that is. Without anxiety about imperfection. It does not mean we stop caring. It does not mean we become careless or sloppy or indifferent. It means we stop letting the fear of getting it wrong prevent us from being fully alive. A little boy was once overheard talking to the sky before bed. He said, "If you cannot make me a better boy, do not worry about it. I am having a real good time as I am." There is something in that, is there not? A kind of natural confidence that has nothing to do with arrogance and everything to do with being at ease in your own skin. Children have it before the world teaches them to doubt themselves. And we can find our way back to it, not by becoming children again, but by remembering what the child already knew, that being alive is enough. That being here is enough. That being imperfect and still showing up is more than enough. The second gift is perhaps the most beautiful. When we stop holding ourselves so tightly, when the armor around the heart begins to soften, something warm starts to flow. It is a warmth that was always there but could not get through. Like a spring that has been blocked by rocks, and when the rocks are moved, the water comes, clear and cool and generous, as if it had been waiting for this moment all along. This warmth is love. Not the complicated, conditional love that we often associate with the word. Not the love that says, "I will love you if you meet my expectations," but something simpler and more ancient. The love that a grandmother feels when she looks at a sleeping grandchild. The love that rises in you when you see a stranger being kind to someone in need. The love that catches you off guard sometimes, standing in a grocery store or watching the rain, and you think, for no reason at all, life is so tender. And I am part of it. There is a story about two old friends who sat together on a bench overlooking a valley. They had known each other for many years, through good times and hard ones, through arguments and reconciliations, through all the ordinary mess of two lives lived side by side. They were not young anymore. Their hair had gone silver. Their hands were spotted with age. But there was an ease between them, the kind that only comes after decades of showing up for each other without pretending to be anything other than what they were. One of them said, after a long, comfortable silence, "Do you know what I think the best part of getting older is?" "What?" said the other. "You stop pretending. You stop trying to be impressive. And then all this love that was stuck behind the trying, it just comes out. It just flows. Like it was always there, pressing against the dam, and you finally let it through." The other one nodded. "I think that is why old people cry at everything," she said. They both laughed. And then they sat in the quiet together, watching the light move across the valley, and neither of them needed to say another word. When we are at war with ourselves, this love gets trapped behind the walls. We feel it in flashes, in moments, but we cannot sustain it because sustaining it requires an open heart, and our heart has been busy defending itself. But when the war quiets, even a little, the walls begin to come down. And the love that flows through is not something we have to create or manufacture or deserve. It is something we have been holding back, like a river that was always running, always full, always ready, just waiting for us to remove the stones. An old Indian teacher once wrote these words, "All you need is already within you. Only you must approach yourself with reverence and love. Make love of yourself perfect. Make love of yourself perfect. Not your behavior, not your achievements, not your appearance or your reputation or your practice. Your love of yourself. Let that love become whole and unhurried and unconditional. Because that love, when it is allowed to flow freely, does not stay inside. It cannot. It is not in its nature to stay contained. It spills over. It reaches everything it touches. The way a candle does not light only itself, but fills the entire room with warmth. And this brings us to the third gift, the deepest one, the one that is hardest to put into words and yet is, in many ways, the simplest of all. When we stop believing that something is wrong with us, when the comparing mind goes quiet, when the second arrow is not fired, when the hand rests gently on the heart and the body softens, what is left? This is the question the great teachers have been pointing us toward for thousands of years. Not as a riddle, not as a test, but as a genuine invitation to look. When you peel away the stories, the fears, the judgments, the endless striving, what is actually here? There is an ancient teaching that asks us, who would you be if you did not believe something was wrong with you? Not who would you become someday. Not who would you be after more work, more effort, more improvement, more years of trying to sand down your rough edges. But who are you, right now, right here, in this very breath, if the story of your wrongness simply stopped? If the voice that has been narrating your flaws went silent, just for a moment, and you were left with only what is actually here, sit with that for a moment. Let it settle like snow on a quiet field. Do not try to answer it with the mind. The mind will want to make a list, to build a new and better version of you. That is not what this question is asking. Let the body answer. Let the heart answer. Let the silence answer. Who are you when the noise stops? There was once a student who traveled a great distance to ask a teacher this very question. She had been searching for years, the way many of us search, reading books and following paths and sitting in silence and hoping that around the next corner she would finally find the thing she was looking for. She arrived at the teacher's door exhausted, dusty from the road, and full of the kind of urgency that only comes from looking very hard for something you are afraid you will never find. She sat down and said, "Teacher, I have been searching for my true self for many years. I have read every book I can find. I have tried every path. I have sat in stillness until my legs ached and my mind screamed. Please, tell me, who am I, really? Underneath all of this confusion, who am I?" The teacher looked at her for a long, quiet moment. There was no hurry in her eyes, no judgment, just the kind of patient attention that makes you feel that time has stopped, or perhaps that time was never the point. Then she said, very simply, "Who is asking?" The student opened her mouth to answer, and then she stopped, because the question had turned her around. She had been looking outward, searching for her true self as if it were a place she had not yet visited or a treasure she had not yet found. And now, suddenly, the question pointed her back to the one place she had never thought to look. Right here. The awareness that was sitting in this room. The presence that was asking the question. The quiet, open, curious aliveness behind all her searching. It had been there the whole time. Through every book, every path, every dusty mile. It had been looking out through her eyes, listening through her ears, breathing through her lungs, aching through her longing. It was not something she needed to find. It was the one doing the finding. "Oh," she said softly. And then she began to laugh. And the teacher laughed with her. And neither of them could say exactly what was funny, but it did not matter, because the laughter itself was the answer. The great poet Rumi described this moment of recognition with words that have echoed through the centuries. "I have gotten free of that ignorant fist that was pinching and twisting my secret self. The universe and the light of the stars come through me. The ignorant fist, that is the tightness. That is the self-doubt. That is the voice that says you are not enough. And when it opens, when it finally lets go, what comes through is not something small and personal. It is the universe. It is the light of the stars. It is everything, flowing through you the way the wind flows through an open window, the way water flows through an open hand. You are not separate from this world. You never were. The goodness we spoke of at the very beginning of our time together, the goodness that means belonging, gathering, togetherness, it is not a concept. It is a living reality, and it is what you are made of. Rumi wrote one more line that belongs here, at the end of our journey. He said, "I am the crescent moon, put up over the gate to the festival." Picture that for a moment. A warm evening, a path leading through an old town, past stone walls and lanterns, and the sound of music somewhere ahead. And there, above the entrance to a great celebration, hangs a crescent moon, thin and luminous against the darkening sky. It does not do anything. It does not perform. It does not earn its place or justify its light. It simply shines, and by shining it says to everyone who passes beneath it, "Welcome. Come in. The festival is here. The festival has always been here, and you were always invited. You are that moon, not metaphorically, not after you have done more work on yourself. Right now, tonight, as you are, your goodness, your warmth, your quiet, shining awareness, this is the light over the gate, and the festival it welcomes you to is not somewhere else. It is not after you have improved yourself or solved your problems or become a better version of who you are. It is this breath, this moment, this ordinary, extraordinary, unrepeatable life. So let us rest now, truly rest. Not the restless pause of someone who is waiting for the next thing, but the deep, easy rest of someone who has come home and knows it. Let your body be heavy. Let the bed or the floor or wherever you are lying hold you completely. You do not need to hold yourself up anymore. You have been held all along. Let your breathing be soft. Let it come and go without any effort, the way waves come and go on a shore that does not try to call them. And let this one truth settle into you like warmth from a fire, like sunlight into soil, like a hand placed gently over a heart. Nothing is wrong with you. Nothing has ever been wrong with you. You are the sun behind the clouds. You are the jewel beneath the dust. You are the crescent moon over the gate. And you have always, always been enough. We have come a long way together tonight, and yet, in another sense, we have not moved at all. We have simply been sitting here, breathing, listening, letting the words wash over us like warm water. And that is enough. That has always been enough. The Buddha once said something that sounds almost too simple to be true. He said, "Peace comes from within. Do not seek it without." We hear those words and we nod, because they sound right, because they sound wise. But tonight, perhaps, they land a little differently. Perhaps tonight, you can feel the truth of them in your body, not just your mind. The peace you have been looking for is not in a better job, or a different body, or a quieter mind, or a more perfect life. It is here. It has been here this whole time, as close as your own breathing, as near as the warmth of your own hand on your own chest. We began this evening with a question that lives at the heart of every spiritual tradition, every quiet moment of self-reflection, every long walk taken alone. What if nothing is wrong with me? What if the voice that whispers otherwise has simply been mistaken? And through the stories we have shared, through the monks and the healers and the travelers and the fishermen, through the circles drawn in palms and the photographs carried across oceans, through the gardens where everything is allowed to grow, and the winter fields where the stars come out one by one, a single answer has been gently arriving. Not as argument, not as proof, but as something you can feel, something your heart recognizes even when your mind is still catching up. Nothing is wrong with you. You are not broken. You are not behind. You are not the sum of your mistakes or the shape of your fears. You are something much older and much simpler than any of that. You are awareness itself, warm and open and endlessly patient, looking out through these eyes, breathing through these lungs, resting in this body, right here, right now. In the Zen tradition, there is a practice of asking questions that have no answers. They are called koans, and their purpose is not to make the mind work harder, but to help it finally rest. One of the most famous is simply this: what is your original face? The face you had before your parents were born. It is not a question you can think your way through. It is a question that invites you to stop thinking altogether, to let the mind grow quiet, the way a pond grows still when the wind dies down. And when the pond is still, it does not need to do anything to reflect the sky. It just does. Naturally. Effortlessly. If the sky was always there, the pond simply had to stop rippling long enough to see it. You are that pond tonight. And the sky that is reflected in you, the vast, open, luminous sky, is your own goodness, your own wholeness, your own belonging to this beautiful, mysterious life. You do not have to remember everything we spoke about tonight. You do not have to carry any of it forward as a task or a lesson or one more thing to get right. If anything from this evening has found its way into your heart, it will stay there on its own. The way a seed stays in the soil. You do not have to push it. You do not have to worry over it. You just have to let it be and trust that in its own time, in its own way, it will grow. And if nothing has stayed, that is fine too. Sometimes the most important work happens beneath the surface, in places we cannot see, in ways we will not recognize until much later. Sometimes we plant a seed and forget about it entirely, and then one morning, months from now, we notice a small green shoot pushing through the earth, and we think, oh, there you are. You were growing all along. The Zen masters say, spring comes, and the grass grows by itself. You do not have to make anything happen tonight. You do not have to become anything new. The grass already knows how to grow. The heart already knows how to heal. The breath already knows how to come and go. And you already know, in the deepest part of yourself, in the place beneath all the worry and the doubt and the noise, that you are home. So let the night hold you now. Let the darkness be soft and kind, the way it was when you were very small, and sleep was the easiest thing in the world. Let your thoughts drift if they want to drift. Let them settle if they want to settle. They are just clouds passing through the sky of your awareness, and the sky does not mind what passes through it. The sky is always clear. The sky is always open. The sky is always at peace. You have done enough today. You have been enough today. You have been enough every single day of your life, even the days when you were certain you were not. Especially those days. Because even then, even in the middle of your doubt, the sun was shining above the clouds. The jewel was gleaming beneath the dust. The moon was hanging over the gate, luminous and patient, waiting for you to look up and see that the festival was already here, and that you were already invited, and that you had been the guest of honor all along. Nothing is wrong with you. Nothing was ever wrong with you. Rest in that tonight. Let it hold you the way the earth holds the trees, the way the ocean holds the tide, the way this quiet darkness holds the stars. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us here at Sleepy Monk.